Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Out of Character, the show where your favorite creators drop out of character for an hour to talk with game designer and host Marc Tassin, that'd be me, about their art, their process, and the nerdy stuff that inspires them. From the secrets behind their craft to the ins and outs of the business to the games, shows, and books they can't get enough of, it's a unique and candid look at the people who create the stuff that you and I love. Now, as always, we'll have the comments open during the show. So if you have things that you'd like to ask or points or things you'd like to add, drop it in. We'll do our best to grab those as we're going along. So this week we have a special guest. This is episode 26, and I've been wanting to have a musician on the show, and I'm super excited about who's going to be with us today. I'm going to start just by playing a bit of their music first to give you a taste of their style and the amazing stuff that they do. So let me go ahead and get this started now. This I'm hoping is going to work because I'm afraid it's not letting me switch it to the different form.
The sun in its sky, the rugged hills, the sea, these bright and open lands are a strange home to me. My dear, the tears you see are for our sacrifice, for Modron's lies, for the loss of donors' eyes. My heart is locked below with the honored ones who fight for our towers, tunnels, halls, for our forges' brilliant light. My dear, do not forget the deep lands dark and cold. To love this foreign land is to prize brass over gold.
All right, an absolutely incredible piece. And with that, let me introduce our guest, Sarah Lynch. Sarah, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, very happy to be here.
So, hey, tell us a little bit about what you create. People already kind of have an idea. So,
Yeah, so I do a lot of different things. I'm a studier and scholar of traditional songs, and
mhm.
I write my own songs as well. I'm also an illustrator. I also do documentary work and journalism from time to time. Yeah, so have my a few different irons in the fire, as they would say. um,
Right.
yeah,
So let me ask, I'm going to start just by asking about your music. That piece is one that is actually not your usual thing, which that one is about dwarves and lost homelands and things, and it's absolutely beautiful. Um, the thing that you typically focus on, however, is it Appalachian folk music? Is that the writer, or how would you describe your primary musical focus?
yeah. So I study folk music from a few different traditions.
Hmm.
Definitely Appalachian traditions, like Southern Mountain traditions, traditions from the South generally, and then also England and Scotland. So some of these songs are like work songs, songs that are designed to get work done that people have been singing for hundreds of years. Other songs are commonly called ballads, so these long story songs that are ways that people have transmitted folklore and history and news for hundreds of years, going back at least to the 1200s, but it's
Right.
probably a much older tradition. So I'm excited about a lot of different kinds of songs that come from the historical heritage and both what they can teach us about folklore and the beliefs of from the past, and then also visions that these songs give us for a different future, the ways that these songs can be structured for us to put our own lyrics in and create something new out of them.
Right. Well, I think that's one of the things that for me, having you on the show today, and for a lot of the folks watching who are gamers, one of the things that we love is we love to be informed by history, right?
Yeah.
We're unnecessarily obsessed with historical accuracy in our fantasy games with dragons and elves, and I think that that's one of the things that drew me to your music is that there's this sort of this idea that I think we can all draw on that for our own storytelling, the traditions that you're talking about. Because if you look at a medieval fantasy world, you're going to be dealing with the same sorts of limitations of early pre-industrial types of societies where you're sharing music not necessarily by the written word, but by just one person memorizing what the other person has taught them. And it just seems very like really interesting to me, your work in that area. I mean, what sort of drew you to this originally? How did you discover it?
So I got really drawn to this music as a kid. There were folk revivals, so like music that was created in the 60s and 70s, where artists were looking at these older songs and doing their own interpretations of them. There were these folk revival artists that my dad was playing a lot in the house on records, and
Uh-huh.
I was just really very like immediately attracted to that music. And so I taught myself some ballads growing up, and some my aunts who were also into that music taught me some songs too. And then really when I got to undergrad, I grew up in Tennessee, went up to New York State for college. I met other people who my age who were into these old songs too, and that really encouraged me to keep going with this music. But I think what always like really popped for me about this was the layers of folklore and history that you could get out of one song. How these songs were very emotional, very dramatic. I'm thinking particularly of ballads, these story songs,
Yeah.
and how much could be unpacked from that, and how much that made me feel connected to, in my case, ancestral experiences. If we're talking about England or Scotland, and yeah, it clued me into ways, into beliefs that people that I was no longer connected to, but people in my ancestry had been connected to. So it creates
Yeah.
these songs create a sense of community as well in that way.
You mind if I ask what sort of beliefs were you're referring to? Like what sort of ideas and beliefs resonated with you when you started to hear these? If it's not too personal of a
Oh,
question.
absolutely. I mean, it can be so many different things. A lot of the songs that we have these days started being documented in the 1600s, 17, 1800s,
Hmm.
but even kind of what we would call like the early modern era. But a lot of them have pieces of folklore that go back much further to even pre-Christian periods. So there are songs about fairy queens, for example, and about the fae, about fairies in general, who in of themselves seem to be connected to beliefs around ancient land spirits. That would have that would have been in Gaelic cultures before the Romans even showed up. So it kind of depends on how far back you want to dig.
Yeah. Right.
But stuff like that, things that are beliefs that are often pagan or animist. Also, sometimes you get to see political perspectives that you don't expect in these songs,
Hmm.
and that can feel kind of radical. And we always have to put these songs in the context from which they're emerging, and not put too much of our perspective on them. But for example, at the moment, I'm studying songs that come out of the 16, 1700s that are often called warrior women ballads.
Mm.
And these are songs in which women that were incredibly popular in their day, in which women would disguise themselves as men, as sailors or soldiers or smugglers, or drummer boys, and go off and have adventures. And a lot of times these stories are kind of heteronormative romance. Folks, these women go off to rescue their
Hmm.
lovers and that kind of thing. But you also have these images of people who are embodying gender in all these different ways, and are having a great time and are rewarded for
Yeah.
that. And so we also get these perspectives that we don't always expect, that can also feel really encouraging for us as a modern audience.
Yeah. Now, I mean, do you have a sense of who is writing these stories? Because I know exactly the sort of thing you're talking about. They dress up and they become a sailor or something. Sometimes it's because their husband never came home from sea and they went looking for them. But other times it's someone just ran away and dressed up like the real life tale of Anne Bonny, for example. But I mean, do we know if these were written by women, originally told by women, or are they stories that were, male written under the male gaze, or what, do we know anything about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. For these types of warrior woman ballads, certainly men were writing these stories a lot, but it's also almost certain that women were writing the songs as well. Women
Yeah.
were selling these songs on the street, they were vending them.
Hmm.
And a lot of times folks who were vending were also doing the writing too, and
Mhm.
trying to make a buck by writing a song. So, and that, that goes for like so many of these songs that have passed through oral tradition. For the most part, we really don't get to know who the authors were. And even in the case of these 1700 songs, authors were very rarely
Yeah.
credited. And so, but almost certainly women had a hand in a lot of these songs. And women, since these are oral traditions, right? Women are a really big part of oral tradition, especially in the traditional confines of home and singing to their children, that kind of thing. And they're choosing
Mhm.
what songs get passed down. So women are co-authors in that way too, of choosing what songs get to pass to the next generation.
Right. They're sort of filtering, saying like, okay, this one we're not. I'm just not going to tell this one, but this one I can get behind. This one. This one's good, no matter who created it. Right. Uh,
Absolutely. Yeah, they're editors. They're editors, and they're changing the songs. They're changing the songs as they go too. So
it's interesting because I think that's something that writers and authors and gamers who write within uh, non-modern settings, pre-modern settings, have the opportunity to remember one of the things you pointed out, which is that you've just described that this music is used for everything. It's used to convey spiritual beliefs. It's being used to convey political ideas. It's being used to convey adventure and fun, but also you know escapism, right? Oh, that dream of getting out of it. And I think that we don't use music enough in our creative endeavors. Sometimes I think Tolkien was hardcore about his songs to the point that people make jokes about it. But
right.
and I mean, you make a good point that people were using this as a way to sort of communicate all sorts of ideas in a time before there were other forms of communication.
Absolutely, and especially in societies that are largely unliterate,
Hmm.
or very mixed in terms of literacy.
Yeah.
By the time you get into the 1800s, there are more and more people who can actually, read, but
Right.
in Scotland and England, for example, or the American colonies. But yeah, oral traditions just always been there. It's always been one of the main forms of passing cultural values. So yeah, these songs are, and especially in cultures where we're so used to entertainment these days as spectacle, as someone is up on a stage or we're sitting in front of Netflix and we are watching, right?
Hmm.
But so much of traditional song is participatory. It's something people are doing together, or even ballads that are often but not always sung solo. There's a lot of active listening on the part of the audience, to figure out the meaning of the song and discuss what the song means. And so that would be such a huge way of consuming media or participating in meaning,
Yeah.
before other forms of entertainment or literacy. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's awesome. I think it's something we all can bring more into our creative pieces and our games and all the rest that we're working on. One thing I've noticed too is that, we think of songs and it's got all these, it's got the A section, the B section, it's got all of these different ideas going on. And a lot of these songs are actually almost more of a framework to hang the story on, as opposed to the song being the the melody being the piece itself that you're sharing with the person. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that or experience with how that came about, but I just noticed that it's sort of drawing you to the story as opposed to the notes that you're actually singing in a lot of these cases.
Right. There's a lot of in ballad traditions, especially as I know them from Appalachia, there is
Hmm.
so much flexibility with rhythm and with the melody itself.
Yeah.
Things are going to change inevitably through oral tradition anyway. The way one person sings a melody is not how the next person is going to hear it. But there's so much flexibility around that, and the melody is usually very very simple. The rhyme
Hmm.
scheme is usually very very simple as well. Like you're working with quatrains a lot, just A B A B, and then yeah, what but right, you're I love the way you say it, hanging the story um, on
Yeah.
the melody. Yeah, it's less about each person can use the melody. Each singer can use the melody in a way that conveys the story effectively if they want
Hmm.
to. They can think a lot about the melody. They can change things up or add ornaments, or they can do nothing with it. It's up to them. And yeah, for me especially in terms of what I get attracted to with traditional music, it is about the story. It's about what is this telling us? And we do know that folks in Appalachia, have used these songs as a way to teach lessons to each other and to kind of riddle out meanings about everyday life and how to keep people in their community safe. And we can assume people have been doing that with these songs from the very beginning, you know.
So I know that throughout this that we have a couple chances to actually have you play some music for us. Do you have a piece that would be appropriate to share with us right now?
Sure, yeah. I wanted to share a song that has some fantasy elements in the ways
Hmm.
that fantasy draws from our everyday folklore,
Yeah.
or from different historical folklore. So I like to perform, and you would have heard this in the recording at the beginning too,
Hmm.
on this instrument called a shruti box. I'm mirrored here, so I'm figuring out how to show it
Yeah.
on my screen. So this is a harmonium instrument, and it comes from subcontinental India. It's not
Hmm.
traditional to the British Isles or to Appalachia, but if I use it enough, it will be for Appalachia at least. And it produces these beautiful drones, and so it's like very pleasing to just sing, especially for me as someone who generally sings unaccompanied, to sing on top of these drones. So just some context for what I'm about to sing for you.
Hmm.
I'm going to sing a song that was collected in North Carolina. That actually, the history of it goes back all the way to the 1200s in Scotland, in the border country. So there was a man named True Thomas, or Thomas Rymer. He eventually became known by those names. And he was a laird in the Scottish border country in the 1200s. And he, during his lifetime, gained a reputation as a seer and a prophet, as someone who could predict the future. And after he died, all these stories emerged as to how he must have gotten these powers of prophecy. And so ballads eventually emerged talking about how the Queen of Fairies must have
Hmm.
come to him and taken him into the world of the fairies to give him his powers of prophecy, then send him back to the mortal realm again. So this song is about him meeting the fairy queen. By the time the song got to America, and this is the only version of this that I'm aware of that has been collected in North America, the it's no longer clear that this woman is the fairy queen, but we can tell she's this very powerful figure.
Hmm.
So this song feels very dreamy and strange, and it's one of the shorter ballads you'll ever hear, just 5 verses. So here is let me get the right pitch here. New True Thomas. True Thomas lay on yonder hill and saw a lady gay, a lady that was bright and fair, come riding down the way, come riding down the way. Her dress was of the grass green silk, her cloak was velvet fine, her horse's bridle silver gay, and dressed in gold so fine, and dressed in gold so fine. She turned her milk-white steed about and took him up behind. And when she spurred her horse's side, they flew on like the wind, they flew on like the wind. And on they rode, and on they rode, till they came to a garden green. Lie down, True Tom, the lady said, and pick that fruit for me, and pull that fruit for me. He ate the fruit of that green tree, laid his head on the lady's knee. Stay still, True Tom, the lady said, I'll show you fairies three, I'll show you fairies three. He got him a coat of the velvet cloth, and shoes of silver so gay. And 7 long years were past and gone before he returned this way. Before he returned this way.
Oh, wow. That was absolutely beautiful. Thank you. And
Yeah.
haunting, too.
I love how these songs are these memes, these nuggets of so much information for us if we do a little digging. Because
Right.
on the surface we have these really cool, strange images of this guy meeting this woman. They're flying around
Yeah.
on a horse.
Right.
She says she's going to show him some fairies,
Right.
and this song has sort of a less clear succession of events compared to some ballads.
Hmm.
But we still have these really powerful images that really seem to mean something. And
Yeah.
the further we dig in, we're like, okay, this woman is a fairy queen. This man is a historical figure, a prophet. And we have all these little clues in the song. She's wearing grass green silk, which is this favored color in Scotland, especially, is this favored color of the fairies. And we have this scene in a garden, which in older versions of the song was a little more clearly an allegory for the Garden of Eden. And so there's so many different things to pull from this beautiful story. Yeah.
It gets your creative thoughts going on like how the changing world would actually change the old powers in the same way that the music changes, but the hints are still there. I'm sorry, I'm
Yes,
going off on, ooh, it'd be fun. It's also
absolutely.
reminds me a little bit of buildings in Europe, where you look at a building, but then you realize that the width of it is the width of these medieval buildings that were pre-planned, and that the foundation is actually Anglo-Saxon, and that the step across the front is the top of a Roman temple that was pulled down and just made a really good front step. And you start looking at it, I feel like these songs are much the same.
That's a really beautiful allegory. Yeah, yeah, I think that's a really apt comparison. Yeah, these songs we're given, as they pass through oral tradition, they're given a structure, they're given a kind of logic of events, but singers just keep changing these songs all the time. And in this case, I'm talking specifically about songs from like English Scottish traditions that have
Yeah,
ended up
yeah.
in Appalachia, where a lot of it's by accident, but a lot of it's on purpose too. And so these songs end up being mappings of cultural change, because a song that was a song we might have versions of it from the 1700s that go one way, where like say it ends in a particular way, the story does, and then
Hmm.
a few hundred years later the ending's different because someone thought it should be.
Yeah.
They didn't like that ending.
Right.
And so or say, if there's stories where maybe even sometimes these are based off of real historic events, where like maybe a character, someone
Hmm.
is murdered, right? And the outlaw is never caught. Well, in some
Hmm.
versions of that same song, that person is caught and put in prison. And it's
Right.
probably because the singer really wasn't satisfied with that ending. So yeah, we're given these structures to work with, and then it's really beautiful and interesting to see the ways that people make the songs their own to suit their own truths.
Now, do you think I hear all of this and I feel like we've taken these beautiful butterflies and we're pinning them into cases in some cases when they fall into academic hands. Do you think we risk causing the eternal stagnation by sort of locking in a canon version of these songs that were never meant to be canonized? Do you think there's any risk of that?
I do think I do think we do lose something when certain songs become predominant in the culture,
Hmm.
and yeah, do become canonized. I think it's great anytime people are getting access to traditional songs, whatever version of it they're learning,
True.
and
Yeah.
getting excited about. But also, yeah, certain versions become popularized, and sometimes the ways they become popularized are by shortening them or losing some of the context. So,
Hmm.
for example, Anais Mitchell and Jefferson Hamer created a really beautiful album, a gorgeous album several years ago that's just called Child Ballads, and that's a name for a certain collection of ballads.
Hmm.
Super gorgeous. I totally recommend people listen to it. But something that they chose to do with a lot of the songs was shorten them. You know, these are traditionally songs that would normally, if you were to sing them, would go over the kind of 3 minute mark of a lot of pop songs. And we actually like lose a lot of really good folklore, and we lose some of the logic of the songs,
Yeah.
of the actions that the characters are making by shortening them. And I get it, like they made an album that sold well. Those versions of those songs are what I think many, like most people are familiar with if they've heard these kinds of ballads. But we've also lost something in that process. So I love it's democratic. Part of what I love about this process is that it's so democratic, and that one song can mean something different and be changed by each person. So
Right.
yeah, finding other versions of the old songs are is really gratifying.
And what was the name of the artist again?
Anais Mitchell, Anais, Anais
Okay.
Mitchell, and Jefferson Hamer.
I absolutely know them because Riddles Wisely Expounded is an amazing song that
Yes,
the story and the hints at magic and all the rest is just like a beautiful story. So yeah,
absolutely.
before
Yeah.
we're done, I'll get that up so that people can find them and look up their music because yeah, it's actually that album is the Child Ballads album is fantastic. I thought I recognized it when you mentioned it. So
Yeah, it's gorgeous, and I, you know, there. So listen to that album, and then just go find other versions of those songs, because
exactly.
you'll get like, especially for the Ballad of Tam Lin, which has so many fantasy elements of fairies and knights and transformation and a really strong heroine character. There's a whole sequence about fairies and the fairy queen that we actually don't get in their version. That's important to the story. So
Okay.
yeah, getting to see all the different reflections of the same story is part of what makes them so accessible and personal.
So I always give people homework. So there's your first bit of homework for this week is to check that out and then check out the original other version, not original, the other versions that are told of those out there. That's just great. So I want to ask you a little more bit more about your instrument. What can you say the name of it again for
Yes,
folks?
a Shruti box,
Okay.
Shruti, Shruti
Okay.
box. I'll show it. I'll show it again. It's
Yeah.
so it's operated with a bellows. So I'm
Hmm.
pumping on this side. It's sucking in air through these holes,
Yeah.
and then whatever notes I want to be playing, there are reeds in here behind these
Oh,
little
okay.
keys. And so as it blows, it's blowing on the exposed reeds and playing the notes that I want to play.
Would you take a Shruti box on a dungeon adventure?
No,
Okay.
it's too heavy.
Good to know.
Unless it had, you know, unless the Shruti box is enchanted in some way, that's pretty
Of course,
critical, you
yes.
know, to the mission, of course. These are heavy and bulky, and I don't think would work well. You know, if you were a bard that had a pretty good gig playing at the same tavern every night, you know,
Yeah.
or like for a few months at a time and then moving to the next town, it would work. It would work just fine. But I don't think it's a great mission instrument unless you
Unless
can
maybe you're
get,
half ogre or something like that, in which
yeah,
case it might
unless,
work out fine,
right,
right?
that would be absolutely fine. But if you're human, if you're maybe elven, if you're of the lighter, smaller variety, as I am,
Yeah.
then a bit too much to lug around, I think.
I always like to ask that partly because of that reason, because it's always funny the things that we think of as taking on your mission, like for example, a lute, which would basically break in the first 10 minutes of the adventure because they're so fragile in most cases. Um,
Hmm.
is it a pretty sturdy instrument overall, though, or is it
It's very sturdy for sure.
okay?
Yeah, yeah, and you can. It's. I'm just gonna knock on it.
Yeah.
it's it's very sturdy. It is easy and compact to travel with compared to something like a guitar, for example. I can just
Hmm.
get on a plane with one of these, and put it in storage, and there's no big deal. They're very hardy instruments, so they could probably survive a lot.
Hmm.
They're just a bit heavy to carry around.
So I want to let folks know that as we're talking here, I'm going to share some of Saro's links on the screen. You are very active on a lot of different social media platforms, content creation platforms. For example, I know you have a Patreon is one of the things. You know, is are you finding yourself like how much of your life do you end up spending just posting the things, just putting the stuff out there as opposed to actually creating what you're posting?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I spend often spend a few days a week on social media, particularly for my TikTok. That's
Hmm.
a lot of my most of my content starts on TikTok and then gets redistributed to other platforms like Instagram and Facebook. Um,
Hmm.
and that is, on the one hand, it's fun because by creating that kind of content, I get reminded of songs I know that I'd forgotten about. Like, it's a good way for me to rehash a lot of my material and be like, oh, yeah, I love that song. And also, it encourages me to learn new material too. Um, but it's also, this is definitely part of how I run kind of a new business for me. I teach
Yeah.
online courses. I'm going to start doing that in earnest in January.
Okay.
And this is a, and so the TikTok is a big way to get my work out there and get people to notice and sign up. And so, but it earnestly does end up being a few days a week of planning and filming and editing,
Hmm.
which is more time than I would like it to be.
Yeah, and
Certainly.
unfortunately,
But
but
it
that's the
is
reality of a business, right? Is the difference between
absolutely.
just doing something as a hobby. And I think that that's one reason I like to touch on is we like to try to share information that's going to help other creators who might be looking to do some of the same sorts of things. And I mean, if you had one word of advice about all of these, any like one or two things you've been like, oh my gosh, people should know this before they start this down this road.
Yeah, I guess just be kind to yourself in terms of your own art and
Hmm.
your also the speed at which you work, because often we can set expectations for ourselves that something should only take a certain amount of time, but when it comes to media production, things always take longer than we think it will. So
Yeah, yeah.
be kind, just be kind to yourself, be patient. It's okay to take a breath and take a break, come back to the thing. Yeah.
Especially when you feel that pressure of I must produce new content all the time, right? It makes it very hard sometimes to just make that because you end up getting so wound up in the production part of it.
Right. And it's something I'm always kind of wrestling with and still figuring out is kind of quality versus quantity, where I would prefer to spend more time on a few videos that are really high quality. And I do see creators succeeding in that way.
Yeah, yeah,
At the same time, I think maybe my what I feel I've observed is to get there, you still have to work with the algorithm and be
yeah.
posting pretty consistently to get a certain amount of followers, and then coast on producing the things you like with more time behind them after that point.
Hmm.
So maybe I'll get there eventually. But yeah, self love and patience, and things don't have to be absolutely perfect to post them. Another important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to, if you don't mind me changing gears for a few minutes, I want to
Yeah.
talk about illustration. I know that that's one of your passions. Tell me a little bit about, you know, your love of illustration, what you've done in the past, what you enjoy about it.
Yeah, so this is really fun because when I do interviews, it's pretty much always about traditional song, and I never talk about all the other aspects of my nerddom, um,
Right.
which
Exactly.
are vast. So, growing up, my plan for myself was to be an illustrator, to be an artist.
Hmm.
There's actually a picture I drew when I was a kid of like what I imagined my future was going to be, and
Uh-huh.
it's a triptych. It's three images. One is me with a French beret in front of a canvas, so I'm an artist because I have a French beret. The
Of
next one
course,
is
of
of
course.
me riding a unicorn like Pegasus creature. Still
All
got the
right.
French beret on. Um, and then the third one
I'm
is,
recovering from a cough. You're going to take me out. I know it.
oh no.
Go ahead.
Well, so then the third one is me rolling in a pile of money and throwing it into the
Well,
air.
naturally, being an artist does eventually lead to unicorns and money. I mean, that's how
Abs-
the system works, right?
right, absolutely. So, I have gotten to do illustration on and off and graphic design on and off in my adult life for income, sometimes as my primary source of income, which is I'm very very grateful for.
Yeah.
And at this point in my life is a little more intermittent, but I spent most of still, I think what would still be the majority of my life, just drawing comics, drawing inspired by graphic novels and comics
Yeah.
and manga, and incorporating that into my illustration work. So I definitely have some big inspirations, which I'd be happy to share.
Oh no, by all means, tell us your inspirations. We want to hear.
Yeah, so we're diving into another section of fantasy and nerdery here, but all of these interests for me, I think, in terms of like the folklore and the old songs, and then getting into comics as well, a lot of them interrelate in a lot of ways. And I found that a lot of the comics that I was attracted to growing up incorporated a lot of folklore,
Hmm.
and through fantasy too. So I have samples with me because I
Oh,
of
all
course have
right.
kept these books a
Good.
lot of times. I hope, again, this is mirrored in my view. I don't know if
Yeah. No,
but
looks
so I'll read
normal
it
to
to you.
us.
Oh,
Yep,
that's
looks
great.
normal to us.
Okay,
Yep.
that's what I wanted to know, right? So huge influence on me growing up was Ted Knifey, his work. He did this wonderful series called Courtney Crumrin. I recommend anyone in the world to read it. But it really deftly merges kind of the mortal world with fantasy and a lot of historical folklore,
Oh, cool.
and is very, just has this like really strong heroine, Courtney, who also has a lot of doubts about the world and a lot of skepticism, and has to kind of learn to be a fully feeling and connective person to her family through the course of the story too. So big inspiration to me growing up. Also, in the same ways that traditional songs, a lot of times I love to see as these kinds of visions of other realities, or realities
Hmm.
that we aren't always currently living in. I have deeply enjoyed growing up the work of Hayao Miyazaki, particularly his manga Nausicaa of the Valley of Wind.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of us are familiar with Princess Mononoke and Spirited Away, and Nausicaa, or Naushka is how they
Mhm.
pronounce it in Japanese, was an earlier work of his. And he did this, it eventually became a film, but he did this 4-volume manga that was all about this apocalyptic future in which humanity is struggling to survive. And we have the strong heroine, Nausicaa, who is trying to figure out how to save humanity, and is also deeply connected to ecology and deeply connected to the natural world.
Yeah.
So it has this emphasis, the spirit, to me, like a spiritual emphasis that I was really attracted to when I found this story when I was something like 12.
Yeah.
Got very
That's
excited about
awesome.
it.
Wait. How do you
Yeah.
find that story when you're 12? What lucky world did you live in where those sorts of stories fell into your lap at 12?
So it's so strange. I went to a grade school where there all these books had been printed that were in the school library, that were essentially stills from a lot of Miyazaki films, but with
Hmm.
narration, telling the story underneath the
Yeah.
stills. And so I first came across this story like when I was 12, that was basically a big picture book of the movie.
Hmm.
And it had action. It had this woman who was like an eco warrior, and I had just never seen a story like this before. And
Yeah,
so I
right.
was really, really excited about it. And then a little later in my teenagehood, I came across the manga itself.
Okay, cool. Very
But yeah, it
cool.
was it was a totally lucky random find at my grade school,
Whoever that
in the early
librarian
90s.
was who sat there one day and hit order on that book.
Yeah, or I don't know who maybe specially collected those and then donated them. I have no idea.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
could be. Yeah, I've donated some strange things to the library for that. I'm like, why don't you have this series? Every kid
You
should be
should
reading
have
this,
this.
right? Yeah,
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
awesome. So do you get to do much comic art today, even just for fun, or are you so focused on your music and your other things that it leaves little time for that?
These days, it's a little more intermittent, but I
Hmm.
am hoping to bring more of it into my life. My Patreon, which you gave a link to earlier,
Yep.
patrons, I think it's at $10 or more per month. I do illustrations that are interpretations of the song of the month. So each
Oh,
each month
cool.
has a different song theme, traditional song theme, or something that I've written, since I do write songs, and then I'll do an illustration that is inspired by that song. So that's an excuse I've created to do illustration And I'm also excited to be working with a friend of mine who's a tattoo artist, and we're going to be doing a special run sometime in the next 6 months of ballad tattoos.
Oh, wow.
So I'll be designing tattoos based off of different ballad themes, and then we'll be selling those and getting them on people's bodies. So that's a
I
fun new
love any the
direction.
idea where the first reaction people have is, "That sounds cool. Wait, what?" If that's the reaction, I'm just like going, "That's awesome. That's exactly the sort of idea I love. That's great." Ballad-themed tattoos.
Yep. Yep.
So the question is are you gonna put a link to the song in the form of a barcode SoundCloud hidden in there where they can scan it to listen to
Oh
the
my gosh. Can
because
you
I
tattoo QR codes onto people's
oh,
bodies?
yeah. Yeah, you can.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I
That
I
totally
actually
makes
saw
sense.
someone who did a Spotify link. They created it on, and then we just scanned them. So I'm just saying, if you want to really go a little crazy, hide those in there so people can literally scan the person's tattoo to hear the song.
Wow. That is amazing. I will talk about that with my collaborator because that's insane.
Awesome.
That had never occurred to me.
Okay, well, we've circled back to music, and we're running a little bit low on time. You are going to do another song for us, and I want to make sure that we have time for this because I will admit that having you sing for us is a wonderful part of this night. So, what have you got for us?
Sure. So, I wanted to do another song thinking about, I've talked a bit about how songs change over time. And
Hmm.
also, I think maybe I've touched on the same song sung, depending on the era it's sung in, can be interpreted in really different ways. So we can always, I think it's always good to keep the knowledge of, knowing what a song meant or what it probably meant in one time and place, but then saying, we're interpreting this song this way now. This is the meaning I get out of this song. And so I wanted to sing a song that it has that going on. It's a song about a woman who poisons her lord with the nightshade plant. So
Hmm.
we get some folklore here. The nightshade is a historic poison. Many parts of the plant are poisonous, but especially the berries. And this song historically might have been thought of as something where we're supposed to feel more empathy for the Lord. But I think a lot of singers hearing it now, even though the woman gets punished for her crime at the end of the song, I think we would throw more empathy and interest towards her and her actions. So this song is called "The Woody Nightshade."
Cool.
Let me see. Here we go. Young men come from hunting, faint and weary. What doth ail my love, my dearie? Oh, mother dear, let my bed be made, for I fear the gripe of the woody nightshade. Lie low, sweet Rendo, Rendo, low lie. Come all young men that do eat full well, they that sup quite merry. 'Tis far better, I entreat, to have toads for your meat than to eat of the wild, wild berry. To eat of the wild, wild berry. This young man, he died full soon, by the light of the hunter's moon. 'Twas not by bolts nor yet by blade, but the deathly gripe of the woody nightshade. Lie low, sweet Rendo, Rendo, low lie. Come all young men that do eat full well, they that sup quite merry. 'Tis far better, I entreat, to have toads for your meat than to eat of the wild, wild berry. To eat of the wild, wild berry. His lordship's wench, they hanged her high. She was the cause of our lord to die. And within her hair they entwined a braid of the vine and the berry of the woody nightshade. Lie low, sweet Rendo, Rendo, low lie. Come all young men that do eat full well, they that sup quite merry. 'Tis far better, I entreat, to have toads for your meat than to eat of the wild, wild berry. To eat of the wild, wild berry.
Oh, that was great. And I loved the nightshade entwined in her hair. That was such a great piece.
Yeah, it's this great, it's a powerful image. Yeah.
Right.
And even though this song, the story does not end well for the woman, I can totally see how, and I mean, I have friends who, like, in a modern context, think about this song as so witchy, and it's
Yeah.
passing on folklore around herbal knowledge and poison knowledge that used to be
Hmm.
more germane, more common, for women and for for folks in general. And if you were to contextualize that, for example, like at a Ren fair or something like that, it would be received in a very different way than the song might have been received when it was originally written, with maybe more empathy for our Lord who dies of poisoning, which is no fun. Um,
Yeah.
but there are all these possibilities of using these historic songs for education, but also for entertainment, and to think about them in feminist ways as well.
It's interesting too because one of the things about the reason I think the nightshade in the hair was so fascinating to me is that you bury a person with the tools of their trade in ancient burials, and a knight might be buried with his sword, or a cook might be buried with some cooking utensils and things. And here she's being buried with the nightshade entwined in her hair, so she's almost being buried with her weapon at her
Right.
side, which is
Totally.
a, a very cool idea. So, oh, that
Yeah,
was
I
great.
love yeah. I love that
Well,
interpretation. Yeah.
I appreciate you sharing that with us. We only have a little bit of time left. And so, what I want to do right now is something that we do every single week, which is we take a minute to put a spotlight on someone who's out there who's doing really cool stuff. And we're like, oh my God, you have got to check this person out. They're really cool. You had someone that you were sharing with us today, and I wanted you just to tell me a little bit about this person.
Yeah, so as I got into a little earlier, I'm a huge comics nerd, and I've been reading I read a lot of online comics, so many web comics, and so I've so many folks that I kind of fangirl out over,
Yeah.
and so one of those folks is Petra Nordland, and Petra's current project is called Tiger, comma Tiger. So this is a really wonderful comic that combines elements of fantasy and historical adventure. It's set in a different universe, but is pulling a lot of imagery from kind of 1700 seafaring. But these cultures have their own religion. Gods are very much real in these stories, and influence people's lives. And we have as our main character here who she's pretty stressed out at the moment. But we have a kind of a warrior woman type character. She's from the aristocracy, and she steals her family's ship and passes as her twin brother to captain the ship. And she's a scientist, and she really just wants to go off and study sea sponges, but ends up in some other pretty important affairs. So I just want to throw some attention towards Petra, who's an incredible artist, and I think a lot of your viewers would really enjoy her work.
Oh
And
yeah, and Tiger looks very cool. I am super excited about going through this and discovering this story. Sorry, I have to.
it's absolutely gorgeous, very funny, also just like really strong sense of comedy, and beautiful. There's a lot of love stories or kind of romantic tension going on. A super queer friendly comic.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's my recommendation.
Yeah, absolutely looks fantastic. So, folks, definitely be sure to check this out. It's a wonderful piece, and it's your homework for this week as we wrap things up tonight. Well, we've got a couple of minutes left, so there are a couple of things that let me go ahead and put this away for now. Put away our samples. Um, I just wanted to ask really quick. You know, one of the things that I think is fascinating is how you discovered this music, how you became part of this music. I think a lot of times people feel like they don't know where to go to find this sort of thing to begin to discover it in the first place. Now, my first piece of advice is you. People should go check you out and go check out your TikTok and look at those things, because that sort of thing will lead you sort of on a series of links to other people and other creators. But how what would you recommend to folks who want to learn more about this sort of folk music that's been passed along and has come into the modern age even in its own way?
Yeah, there's kind of some like surface level good entry stuff, and then there's like so many nerdy resources that you can go deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole, right?
Uh-huh.
So there are a few artists I definitely want to recommend people checking out if they just want to start hearing some amazing traditional music. So an artist who's had a big influence on me is named Tim Erickson.
Hmm.
And Erickson is spelled Eriksen. He
Okay.
is from New England. He's an ethnomusicologist as well as just an incredible musician and singer. And his work incorporates a lot of traditional Appalachian singing as well as other cultural influences. So yeah, that is spelled just minus that C that's in there.
Oops. I will fix that. There we go, folks.
Yeah, and so definitely Tim Erickson. He has a lot of albums out. He had an amazing band called Cordelia's Dad that
Hmm.
is these incredible like driving adaptations of older songs. Also, specifically to Appalachia, I'd recommend Jean Ritchie. She's no longer alive, but she was and that's Jean
Hmm.
Ritchie. She was a very, very influential singer in the folk revival of the 60s and 70s, produced a lot of albums as well. Beautiful stuff. Sang a lot of songs that her family, she'd grown up with in her family, and then did a lot of her own research as well about the connections between those songs and songs in England and Ireland and Scotland. And so she's another person I would recommend. This is just another fun band to listen to. Would definitely be Crooked Still.
I'm sorry, crooked what?
Crooked
Still?
Still, Still,
All
as in
right.
a
Like a
moonshine
whiskey
still.
still,
Yeah,
moonshine still, yes.
yeah. I don't believe they're active as a band together anymore, but they're also just a really fun, accessible way to hear a lot of old time inspired music and traditional song.
Awesome. Well, that is great. That is some great information. Folks, go out, check out more of Sarah's work. It's amazing. Definitely support this because there's some great stuff out there. And, she's even doing songs about dwarves and things. So you're absolutely want to check this out. Thank you so much for being on the show. This has been an absolute joy. And thanks for performing for us tonight as well.
Absolutely. And do you mind if I mention one more thing?
Go ahead. Yeah, that's fine.
I'd meant to do this a little earlier in the show, but for anyone who's excited about those kinds of stories about these older songs where women are witty and wily and get their way and
Yeah.
are doing all kinds of gender performance and all that, I'm going to be teaching a course in January called Badass Women in Folk Song. This is going to be virtual, right? So it's accessible to anybody with who has an internet connection.
Uh-huh.
And we're going to be learning songs live together for a month. And folks are also going to be getting historic essays and recordings and playlists on all these different historic themes of women going on adventures and doing magic and all of that. So you can incorporate it into your fantasy role playing. You can sing it every day. You can teach it to children. But if you want more info on that, if you follow me on TikTok or Instagram or become my patron, you can get more info about that upcoming course. Or just go to
Excellent.
my website.
Excellent. Yeah. So, folks, check it out. Definitely. Thank you again so much for having us. And I have a number of people I'm going to be recommending the course to because I think it's going to be exactly their cup of tea. Thanks for being on tonight.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. Thanks, everyone.
Well, folks, that's it. We are out of time again. I would have liked to have talked about a bunch more things tonight, but we had to wrap things up. Next week, we will have a very special guest. David Peterson, creator of Mouse Guard, will be on the show. So make sure to join us for that. And in the meantime, I hope that your adventures go well. Thanks again for joining us.